My name is Charlie Moreton. I am a technical marketing engineer for ICE. And today we're going to talk about ICE in a hybrid cloud environment because we have a lot of customers and partners that are either moving to the cloud or want to have a footprint in both on-prem and cloud. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is more on the beginner side of ICE, but the way that we do it is moving into the intermediate side. And that's why we have both of the diamond showing up here on this slide. And to kind of talk about that, here's what we're going to be going through today. There's a lot of similarities between the different cloud platforms, but they're just named differently. So we're going to go through that. We're going to go through how my lab is set up. We're going to see how the VPN is kind of connected and just do some of your basic ICE installation scenarios. We've done a lot of work in the past with installation and provisioning and APIs and automation, and this is kind of building on those past webinars. So if you've been following us throughout the year, then some of this is going to look very familiar to you. It's just done in a different way. And since we have all different platforms onto which we can install ICE, I am actually going to install on every single virtual platform that we support. I don't have access to an SNS, otherwise I would use that as well. So we're going to have 7 different platforms that we're going to install ICE on, and we're going to have an 8-node deployment at the end of the day. So first thing I want to know though is, in speaking about clouds, what public clouds do you currently use? I see, wow, Azure is one of the big ones out there with 30 results already. So that's really great. While you guys are doing that, I'm going to move on to the next slide and start talking about some of the terminology and similarities between the public clouds. First, I want to let you know that these are the 3 public clouds that we support, and Amazon with their AWS was the first public cloud we supported as a native install, and we did that with ICE 3.1. Azure and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure were introduced in 3.2. And with 3.2, we have changed the default username for all of our cloud platforms. So instead of the default username being admin, we are using ICE admin as the default username. There's also been a security change for the zero touch provisioning. And that's when you put in all of your user data for provisioning in the cloud. Is since that's passed in plain text, we're going to force a password change on your first login to the GUI. And lastly, the serial console connection. So when you SSH into your cloud instance, we're going to use public key authentication. So we'll show you a little bit about that later on as well. So I wanted you just to understand that. But with these 3 cloud providers, I also want to bring up the fact that each one of them has a free tier. AWS and Azure offer their compute resources free for 12 months, but Oracle has a really good compute resource that they offer for free all the time. So there's no time limit on that as of right now. So that's a great resource to use and start to get to learn all 3 of these different clouds. Now with these clouds, we have your containers, and that's pretty much where you create your network inside a container, and then all your resources in your network. Of course, your virtual network, whether it's a virtual private cloud, virtual network, or virtual cloud network, it's all the same thing, different names. And same thing with everything else that's in this list. The user data is what we were talking about for your zero touch provisioning. And we're going to get into detail with that in just a moment. But if we're going to be working on a hybrid ICE deployment, that means you also have on-prem hypervisors, and we support 4 of those. Which virtual hypervisors do you use in your network? So we want to know about that as well to see which ones are the most prevalent out there. And I see a lot of people are answering this in the chat box, and if you could answer it in Slido, we'd be able to capture that information. We're not capturing the information that's in chat, so we do need to know that. All right, so with the zero touch provisioning, we have a lot of information that we can gather in a text file to pass on to your ISE installation. As you can see here, host name, IPv4 mask, IPv6, name servers, all of that stuff. These are the required parameters to pass on. And as you can see here, my username, I've got that changed to ISE Admin here. Admin is the default for on-prem, though. I wanted to call that out. Now with 3.2, we did make some updates to the zero-touch provisioning for your on-prem, and that is you can enable the public key authentication and add your public key right here in your zero-touch provisioning file. Once you have that in there, you have the rest of this information as well. This is all standard from 3.1 and 3.2 just added these specific parameters. Whether it's public key authentication, you can also skip your specific checks, ICMP, DNS, and NTP. That way, if you're waiting for your VPN to come up before you can actually ping your DNS server, then your installation will not fail. So that's a great thing there. If you want to read more about the zero-touch provisioning, I did a full write-up about everything there is to know about it, and you can find it here at this link. If you can't find anything on it there, just drop me a line and I'll answer any questions you have. When it comes to cloud installations, this is the information that you get with zero-touch provisioning inside that box. That is our golden standard. This is the information we pass through. As you can see, there's no username that we pass on cloud installations. It's because the default username for all cloud installations is ISE Admin. On the right, you can see that if somebody were to add that, they can, and the username would just be ignored, and your installation would go forward without any problems. Also, if you wanted to add your secondary NTP server, your secondary domain name or DNS domain, that would also be ignored. Installation would move forward and there would be no problems. So don't add any parameters to it. It's just extra work that's not going to get you anything. So moving on from that, how do we continue to plan our deployment? Well, I put together this list that I would consider the bare minimum of information you need to put together a deployment for ISE, especially if you're doing multiple nodes in multiple platforms. First thing I wanted to point out is that even on my on-prem, like I said, I'm using ISE Admin as my default username. This way I can use the same credentials to log into ISE no matter whether it is on-prem or in the cloud. The other thing I want to bring up is the initial password, the one that we use in our zero-touch provisioning script, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Like I said, if you're setting your password through your ZTP, then you will be forced to change your password on your first login to your GUI. So you need to keep track of what that initialized password is, because if you're using a serial console to log into your CLI, then that's going to use this password, because remember, your GUI admin and your CLI admin are two separate accounts. So keep that in mind. Also, down here in the bottom right, if you see Nutanix CE, I don't have zero-touch provisioning enabled for that one. That's just one that I enabled manually, and I installed it just for bare bones. So we're going to talk about the lab topology and how I have the lab set up for today's webinar. Of course, I've got all three clouds, and I'm going to have an ISE instance in every one of them. Then I have my lab in San Jose, and my admin node and my Active Directory DHCP DNS are all there. But I've also got all 4 hypervisors installed in this lab with ISE installed on those. I also have, of course, my home network where I'm running Meraki, and MX is my edge router, and then an MS and an MR for switching and wireless. And I am using an RDP connection to connect from my home to the lab in San Jose. And that's how I'll be able to show you all the demos that I show you today, is through that RDP connection. Now, for my clouds, I have VPN tunnels set up from each cloud service back to my lab. And for the full effect, a lot of people use different locations, whether it's regionally or branch offices or whatever. So I've got my home office set up as a branch office, and I've got VPN connections back to my home office as well. And we'll go through briefly on how that is done when we get to the demos. So if we take a look in the lab topology down in San Jose, this is where we're going to start out. We have 4 nodes in a deployment right now, just because we don't have enough time in the time allotted for the webinar to start from scratch. So I've already got 4 nodes started. If you see down in my VMware hypervisor, I've got ISE Admin 01. Right now, this is running all the nodes and services that a standalone that is promoted to primary would typically run. ISE Admin 02, of course, is my secondary admin. And then right below that on KVM, I've got my primary monitoring with a PSN way out in Azure. And they're all talking to each other, and that's fine. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to take all of those extra roles and services off of ISE Admin 01, and then add those to the new nodes that we will be provisioning into our full deployment through Hyper-V, Nutanix, AWS, and Oracle Cloud. I know that's a lot. And because it's so much, and because of the time constraints that we have, we are using automation to complete this lab. We're using Ansible. And once the session is over, I will be giving you a GitHub link so that you can take a look and see all the documentation and all the playbooks that I'll be using for today. Now, to bring up Ansible, that means we're using Ansible modules to be able to connect to all the different platforms that we're connecting to. Now, these are all the modules that are available to you for the platforms we're using. As you can see, there's official Ansible modules and there's community created modules. Since Ansible is a Red Hat technology, it's open source. So there are communities out there that create modules that will fill in some of the gaps that exist in some of the official Ansible modules. For today, I am not using the modules that are highlighted in gray just because I've manually created either these virtual machines, or there was nothing for me to use in what I'm showing, like in the community.aws. So from there, I have another question for you that, hey, I understand that everything that we've been showing you for automation lately has been Ansible, and we use it a lot. What do you guys use? Or is there some other technology that you would probably like to see us to use in the future? And I knew Terraform was going to be one. That's one of the first ones that somebody put out there. So we know that. Right. Let's see. Let's move on to some of the fun stuff for you guys. Is we're going to start going into some of these demos. Now, again, I showed you a topology that was full of a lot of stuff, but I just want to let you know, there's 7 demos that I want to get through showing you guys today. And with each one of those, we're going to be building out that 8-node deployment. And as we go through, I'm going to be showing you how I'm doing that, not just running the playbooks, but how do the playbooks work? Why do they work? And why should I use those in my deployment or my automation routines? So we're even going to be creating node groups. And that's one that I like because I haven't seen that yet. So I wanted to add that to it just because it can be done. So once we're done, we'll have 4 PSNs, 2 admin nodes, and 2 M&T nodes. However, I do want to bring up that if you have existing ISE nodes out there that you're going to be building in and using automation to do it, and you don't have the ISE admin user account, well, you cannot add an admin account programmatically. You have to go into the ISE GUI and do this from the ISE GUI. You can't do it from CLI, through Ansible, through API, or anything else. It has to be through the ISE GUI to create an admin user. All right, so now we're going to go into the lab and we're going to start doing the inventory, showing the version, and doing the new node configuration. And the way we do that is here we have my terminal. I'm using Windows 11, and this is my WSL that I have installed on Windows. So it's a regular Linux terminal. I'm using Ubuntu. And this is my admin node here. As you can see, I've got my 4-node deployment. And now I want to use VS Code to see all of my playbooks and everything that I'm going to be using in my virtual environment. So to do that in the current folder, I just use code, and then the dot says open it using the current folder. And here we are. These are all of my playbooks. Now, one thing that I like to do is not get, but we do an Ansible inventory and show it in a graph. It's going to go through my inventory files. Don't worry, I'll show you those in a moment, and see what groups that I have created to kind of group these inventories out. So as you see here, ISE is a group, and I have AWS, Azure, Oracle, and these are my VMware virtual machines. I also have ISE nodes, which shows Nutanix, Hyper-V, and KVM. These are separated the way that they are because remember I showed you the modules that I'm not using? Well, these are the modules I'm not using for automation. They were manually installed. So I separated these to let you know that these are manual inventory and these are dynamic inventory, which means if I add any more nodes into any of these platforms, this will automatically update. And how do we get there? Well, this is over in our inventory folder. We have all of these different files. One for AWS, Azure, VMware, and OCI. These are dynamic inventories. And if we go into one, I'll just click on the one I'm highlighting right now. There we are. What this does is it uses a plugin. And this plugin says, I want you to look at the region that I'm using, enable parallel processing, that just do whatever you do it all at once. You don't have to wait sequentially. And then look inside my compartment and find all of the virtual machines that you can. And then once you do, process them in these types of groups. So if you see owner, project, and role, these are tags that I have created in the cloud environment. And over here, you see owner, project, and role. And you can see that ISE OCI, which is the one inventory file we're in, is using. Then come down here to this group, and I'm using a specific image for my installation of ISE. And I say, if you're using that image, it's got to be ISE. So that's how I have that going into my ISE group. And of course, there's similar parameters in each one of these dynamic inventory files to help you to be able to group your inventory. Now, for the ones that I have created manually, that's the three of these, Hyper-V, KVM, and Nutanix. You just put in what you want the inventory host name to be and tell it where that host is. And then down here, you can tell it how to connect to that host. So like I said, 3.2 enables SSH private key or public key for authentication to SSH. And that's what we're going to be using for connecting in this lab. So now that we've done our show inventory, or I mean our now we've done our inventory, we're going to do our show version, which is playbook number 1 here. Okay, and this is going to show the version of all of our ISE nodes because, of course, you know you have to use the same version of ISE to be able to add it to your deployment. So if we go to Ansible Playbook number 1, we're going to show our version, and right now it's parsing all of the different inventory files that we have in our inventory folder. Oh, we've got a failure here. Oh, and it says ISE Nutanix has failed. See that? So we're going to come up here and we're going to see why it failed at the beginning here. Failed to authenticate public key. So, like I said, in my table, I showed you that ISE Nutanix did not have a ZTP configuration file. So public key authentication has not been enabled on that. So that's a new node. So let's take a look here at the new node folder, and you can see we have different playbooks here, enable API. So we're going to use an API to enable the APIs on ISE, which pretty fun there. If you look at the top of your playbook, you'll see this entry for host. I want to run that on ISE Nutanix. And I do that so that it can pull that information out of localhost. But since I'm running that, I have to tell it I don't want to use the private key file to connect to ISE Nutanix. Like I said, it's not enabled. But I do have my regular username and password enabled because it's on-prem and I can have that. So once we change that and save, we can go back here and we know that we'll be able to at least log into it. The inventory host name, this is a variable with the two curly brackets. So it's going to use the inventory host name. So whatever is up here is going to be filled in here to run. So we're going to do ISE Nutanix.securitydemo.net, which completes my FQDN. And then the username and password that is in a different file. This is, again, a variable. And this comes from the variables main file, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I just want to show you the rest of these. I mean, we have the password reset, but since I manually installed ISE here, then the password does not need to be reset just because it's not going to force me to do a password change on initial login. But as you can see, we still have the ISE Nutanix, and there's no username and password for us to log into ISE here, which means it's going to use whatever login mechanisms we have set in our local host. And that's why I showed you that I changed that from the SSH public key. But one thing that we have to do is we have ISE Nutanix up here still because we have to create an FTP repository to be able to enable the SSH public key. And the reason is we have to create a repository and enable the public key authentication and then import that public key from that FTP repository into ISE for that user. Now, if you see here, create the repository, we have the host name, username, and password. We're using the inventory host name that I showed you, takes it from up here. The ISE username and ISE password comes from the vars main. So does the rest of these variables, and I'll show you that in a moment. But since you don't see a username and password here, that means it's taking all of the credential information from our local host file, right? So if we want to run all of these playbooks for every one of our new nodes, we can certainly come over here and we can type it in and tell it, hey, let's go ahead and run these. But there's an easier way to do that. I also have this playbook here. And what this does is it imports different playbooks and it runs them sequentially. So it'll run this one, wait for that to end, and then it'll run this one, wait for that to end, and then so on and so forth. Now, like I said, we don't have to do the password reset, so I've commented that out. These hashtags here means it's going to ignore that line. And that's how we can add comments or anything else into our files for people to use. So if I go in here and tell it I want to go into the new node, not mail, but run the main.yaml, it's going to go ahead and run all three of those playbooks one right after another. Now remember, with ISE APIs, we have ERS APIs and Open APIs. So I'm enabling both of those. Created the repository. We're going to go ahead and enable the public key authentication, and boom, there we go. And see what this says is that I've already got a certificate on my Nutanix. So I've got the certificate, but I didn't have the SSH. Now let's talk about that main.yaml and all of those variables. As you see here, when you see the variable name for ISE username, I've got it here, and it's set as a Linux environment variable, because you don't want to keep your username and passwords in a text file like this where somebody can get to it. You keep it in your Linux environment so that it just grabs that from the environment, and you're not giving that password up or showing anybody what your password is. All right, so the other thing, you want to make the move to cloud. So we're going to actually deploy into Azure Cloud. And the way that I'm going to do this is, all right, so this is number 2, Azure Deploy. And if we take a look over here to my Azure resource groups, like I've said, remember, the resource group is what houses your virtual network and your virtual deployment in the cloud. I'm going to use that playbook to create a new resource group, new virtual network, subnets, ISE deployment, VPN, and route table, all out of the same playbook. And the thing that I want to bring up about this is when you're doing all of this in one playbook, it's super simple and easy to get everything done. But some modules will take a little bit of extra time. As you can see, we've already created our resource group. We're on to creating the virtual network. So if I do a refresh on my resource group list here, we can see that we've got my ISE multi-cloud webinar resource group. So let's go ahead and click into that. And it takes a moment for it to catch up. But if we refresh, you can see, well, there's my virtual network. So it's adding all the stuff now. The security group and the private subnets, you're not going to see the private subnet or the gateway subnet here because they fall underneath the resource group, the virtual network. So as this is building out, you'll see that ISE will start to install. And then once we start getting into our virtual network gateway, which is our VPN connection, that takes a minimum of 20 minutes. So while that is working, what do we do here? Could be stuck. Well, one of the things that I've noticed in the Ansible config file, this is what tells your system how to connect with and talk through Ansible, through everything else, is that I saw this forks line here, and you have 5 forks. And it says concurrent processes allowed for a host. So since everything is being run sequentially and not concurrently, that got me to thinking. So I opened up a new tab over here. Of course, I gotta source my default profile information. And then once that gets sourced, I am going to go ahead and do a change directory to get back into that ISE multi-cloud directory. And then you can see pipe env shell or pip env shell. That's going to get me into my virtual environment shell. But now I have to also source my credentials for the different platforms that I'm using, which is Azure, AWS, VMware, and ISE. So now that I've got those all done, let's go ahead and do a Control L. That's the same thing as typing in clear. Control L gives you a clean workspace. Now we can go in here and say you have a resource group already that you're using in Azure, and you just want to connect an ISE instance to that resource group. You already have a VPN and everything else. I just want an ISE instance in it. Well, That's very simple. So you do another Ansible playbook. Whoop. And this one won't take nearly as long to go through and install that ISE instance into that resource group. Now, the way we can take a look at that is we go back over here into Azure. Let's go back into our resource groups. And this is my resource group that I have already got my ISE instance installed. This ISE Azure is already there. So we're creating ISE Azure 2, right? Because I am super awesome with naming. That's what I do. Just add another number. So while that's doing that, we can go over to our deployments because I'm creating this as a resource manager deployment. And you can see that I've got ISE and Azure deploying. So my network card is already there. Now it's installing the virtual machine itself. So awesome. We can do that. And then given enough time, I will be able to ping that through the VPN that's already established. And you guys will be able to see that, which is pretty cool and exciting if I do say so myself. But the other thing is, every time we've shown automation so far, whether it's Ansible or we've actually Hosted has shown Terraform in the past and different things like that, we've always done it on a cloud platform. And remember that table that I showed you is we have Ansible modules for every platform that we support. So what I've done is I've got VMware here. I'm using ESXi just because I wanted to show you that you can use Ansible automation in VMware without needing vCenter server. You can use ESXi for that. Let's see. We're on our virtual network gateway without BGP settings. So that's going to be the 20-minute thing here. So we don't need to belabor that one. This is going to take a few minutes itself. So you know what? Let's do this again. Look at that. Look at that. That's the great thing about typing in front of everybody. You will make a mistake. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and provision an ISE VM in VMware. Okay, and before I do that, I want to show you here that for that, you do need to tell it what data store you want to provision to. Of course, the name of your virtual machine, what network to use, the OVF file, so the OVA that you download from CCO. Then with our OVA files, you can choose different versions of OVA file. And that is set in the deployment option, not value, that's shown here. And for the OVA file that I have here, these are the different options. And they are case sensitive. So make sure to keep that in mind as well. So I'm just going to use the eval version. And we're going to send that over to VMware. Now, one thing that I'm going to do after the virtual machine is provisioned, I'm going to add the ZTP info as an ISO through a CD-ROM that's mapped. All right. So let's go on and go back over. And you can see, look, I've already got the virtual machine showing up here and it's installing. Now, one thing I did want to show you about the ZTP in the VMware doing it this way is that when you start your VMware, we're going to bring up the console here so we can actually watch this process live. Once the console comes up, I click on it, right? Launch remote console. Sweet. There it is. All right. So now it's going to connect to our ISE instance. It's connected and we turn it on. Once you turn it on, it's already installed the Red Hat. So we don't have to worry about going through that whole long process. It should just come up to the setup prompt and automatically fill in all of our ZTP information, right? That's the process, and that's why it saves you so much time. But as you see, it comes to your setup prompt and it just sits here, which is maddening because you're like, well, I spent all that time and I created this ZTP script. Why isn't it going ahead and doing what I want it to do? Now you could type in setup here and it would automatically go ahead and load the parameters for your ZTP script, or you can wait 40 to 60 seconds and it'll automatically take it and it'll run for you. So it's still zero touch. It takes a moment to get that running, but again, it's still a lot faster than filling out all of the prompts manually, So it's a time saver. And I'm still talking just to get this thing to come up and go because I want you to see that it actually really does work. And once that does show up and work, there we go. That's gone away. Now we're going to see down at the bottom of the screen. There we go. Bam. As you can see, everything has now been passed through. Cool. So that's what I wanted to show you there. I'm going to get out of there. You see that we are deploying that here. So you see that works. We don't need to go further anymore. So Control C will interrupt that operation and there. Now we have our window back and we can clear that out, get into a new window. All right. Now, I did have another playbook just to power on that virtual machine to show you, but I figured with 3 tabs already running, why do it? Oh, look at that. Our Azure in our existing resource group is already complete. So if we go into our existing resource group, you can see that instead of all the parameters that you would expect for installing a virtual machine into a cloud platform are not there. It's a template link. And the reason is that the Azure module for deploying a virtual machine does not pass the user data. The only way to pass user data is to use a JSON template and to convert your user data into base64 format into the JSON template and reference it here like this. I've got this all explained in the GitHub repository that I'll be giving you the link for later. But that's frustrating. I'm glad that there's a workaround and we can do this programmatically. I'm frustrated that we need a workaround though, because the thing about Azure is that they say you can do everything programmatically, but yes, they give you a template to use if there isn't a module for it. So I wanted to bring that up and let you guys know about that. I also have a playbook to go from a standalone to primary. We've already done that in this lab, as you know, but the playbook is here so you can see what that looks like. Then add initial nodes. Those are the secondary admin, the primary monitoring, and the PSN that I have already added to the deployment. But this one, we're going to remove the primary PAN services. And oh, all right. I had my title slide out of order there, so I'm sorry about that. We're going to go ahead and remove the primary PAN services here. So the way that we do that is we go in here, and as you can see, these are the roles and services that you can enable. And we only want the primary admin role and no services. So we use the open and close square brackets to denote none for the services. We're going to run playbook number 8. And as that runs, we're going to monitor this in our ISE GUI. As you can see, ISE Admin 01 still has it listed as, oh, look at that. Now it's gone. And now the ISE node, see here, oh, it's stopping all the services so that the services can be restarted in the ISE node. This is going to take a while because, well, ISE, and that's what happens is it takes a while. But hey, I've got a secret weapon for that. I bet you want to know what that is, aren't you? Well, don't worry, it's coming up. Oh, I thought it was going to come up a lot faster than what it is, though. There we go. All right, we did a little bit of time travel on that one, just because we don't want to wait 10 to 18 minutes for that to actually restart. And I'll let you in on what that time travel is later. But as you see, as we come in here, we don't have any additional roles and services listed under ISE Admin 01. And if we click into it, you can see that everything is actually turned off, other than the primary admin node. So we're going to come back over and we're going to run the playbook to add the rest of the nodes in. Like I showed you, we're going to add the secondary admin node and the secondary monitoring node, as you can see here. And then the last 3 PSNs. Now, what you could do is instead of having a different task for each one of them, you could actually put these into a loop so that you have your FQDNs and your roles established in this loop. And as you can see here where it says item.roles and item.services, once it finishes with one item in the loop, it moves on to the next, and it will only give you a single task in your task list for your playbook. Now, I did everything separately just so they would each have a separate task in this playbook so you can see as they're being added. And then the last thing that I'm doing is I'm waiting for the synchronization. This is going to take a while, but you see the yellow triangle? It's synchronizing. So I'm going to use my time turner here. And then once the time turner zooms back out, bam, look at that. Everything's good to go. So we're synchronized now. And there we go. We have all 8 nodes into our deployment. Now we're going to create our node groups. So over here on our node groups, you can see that I'm going to create West US, put 2 PSNs into that node group. I'm going to create East US and put 2 PSNs into that node group. I left the optional settings in here so you can see what they are if you wanted to set those. So we're going to take and expand our deployment tree and create these node groups. All right, so we've got our node group and our 2 PSNs into our West US, and now East US has been created and our PSNs have been added to it. Now, instead of refreshing the browser, just click on a different menu item and go back. It's a lot faster that way, and it refreshes. So expand it out and you can see that our nodes are in our node group. How awesome is that? All right, so now I have this for you. We haven't talked about this much, but if you're doing a hybrid deployment and you have multiple nodes in your deployment, then one thing you might want to do is your System 360 monitoring. And this is something that was brought to you in 3.2, and it's really great at seeing the actual health of the hardware in your ISE deployment. Now, the questions that I've gotten so far on this is, with the System 360, do you have to log in to each node to see the monitoring results? And absolutely not. That wouldn't make any sense. So as you see here, I want to bring that back and show you that I am actually going to operations. I'm going to the settings here because, well, the pause, there we go. I'm going to settings here because otherwise, if you just click on monitoring or log analytics from this screen, it's going to open up another tab, and that's going to take a while for that to load and everything. But if you go to settings and then click the tab at the top for monitoring, it just loads right up. So this takes a lot less time to load here. And then as you see under your host dropdown, it lists all of your nodes alphabetically. So you can monitor every one of your hosts right from your primary PAN. You can check out, see, how many cores does this node have? Well, you could either SSH into that node and do a show inventory, or you can, you spend most of your time in your primary PAN anyway, might as well go there and just check that out. Well, all right, now that I know how many cores it has, how much of it is used. So you could do the show CPU usage or show CPU statistics in your CLI, or you can just view it all right there as well. So, all right, that's what we've got there, which I think that's pretty awesome. Now, one thing that I do want to show you that I haven't yet is not that. We're going to go into my DNS server just to show you, how ISE is very DNS specific. Well, I create a host record for every one of my ISE instances. I want to create a new one for ISE Azure 2 because we just created him, right? We saw that he was created. Let's see, action. Oh, I hate this interface, but that's all right. I just do that. New host record is going to be ISE-Azure 2. And the IP address is 192.168. All right, that's the IP address that I have assigned to that template. And look, it says the associated pointer record cannot be. Oh, wait a second. What did I say it was? .100.5. Well, it should, because here's my reverse lookup zones. I've got my 192.100, 108, 192.168.100, and it did create the pointer record, even though it said it didn't. So this is my Azure scope. This is my Oracle scope, and this is my AWS scope. So having those reverse lookup zones is immensely helpful in all of the traffic back and forth from ISE nodes. And then if we come here, we can actually ping our ISE Azure, even though our IP address is a 10 dot. So we're using Well, actually, this one's using a 172 dot because it's my WSL. So we're on different subnets, and I'm able to ping it through the VPN because of the route tables that are set up in the VPN and the different routers. So I wanted to bring that up and show you that and how important that is, which also means that if we come over here, we can hopefully yeah, and it's, the web GUI is still not up yet. It's still coming up. And if we use our public key authentication, boom, we can SSH to it and do our show application status ISE. Now, while that's coming up, I want to also bring up that a lot of people, like if you're playing around with your free tier of your cloud provider, whether it's Azure, AWS, or OCI, you're going to be creating and tearing down your ISE nodes as labs or checking out features or whatever, but you don't want it running all the time because the longer you have it run, the more money it's going to cost you if you're not using a free tier service. So there are only specific things that are free tier. ISE is not one of those. So you can run it, but you probably want to take it down as quickly as possible as well. And what I've done there is you can do what I call the Azure destroy. So I am taking everything that's in my ISE in multi-cloud webinar, and I'm going to delete that whole resource group. And that's by using the absent flag on state. So that will get rid of everything that we created in that resource group. Let's see here. If we go through and do that, you'll see that it will actually come down and get rid of that. That takes about 10 minutes alone to do that. All right. But the thing is, you can also do the same thing with your VMware. So the difference here is that if you do a state absent and then a force yes, it will actually delete a virtual machine in VMware that is currently powered on. So if we do Ansible Playbook 12, this is VMware Ansible. So if we go back over to here, as soon as this starts running, oh, it shut it down and it's gone. So VMware Ansible is gone. All right. And then the last thing that I did is I was getting ready for this webinar. I was creating this deployment and tearing it down so often that it just made sense for me to create a playbook to be able to do that. Now, the reason I left it in here is because if you wanted to know how to remove node groups, takes a node out of a node group to remove a nice node from a deployment, you've got all that information right here. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, so that's going to start removing all those nodes. And while that does that, I wanted to talk to you rather quickly about the VPN. I told you we were going to talk about it, and let's do that. Just because it's something that puzzled me at first until I got the hang of it in creating more than one VPN connection through one virtual gateway. All right. If we go back to our resource groups, into the resource group where my VPN is actually set up. All right. I've got my VPN gateway here. That's my virtual network gateway. Then you have your local network gateways. That's your on-premise. This is the CSR 1000B that I have in my San Jose lab, and this is my Meraki MX67 I have at home. Inside those, if you go into your VPN gateway, you'll see that you have connections. Those connections, you already saw those in my resource group, but it's Azure to CSR and Azure to Meraki. So that's how they connect to my site. So if we go to Azure to CSR, you can see that you have a button for download configuration. If you click on that, you tell it what you have. This will actually download a configuration file. Let's see. Yeah, let's just use that. And that configuration file is, you can copy and paste into your CSR and your VPN works, and it's up. It's great. I love it. It's fantastic, easy to use. Then over here in Meraki, if you click on security, SD-WAN, and site-to-site VPN, I know that Thomas has shown a few times how to set up your VMX in the cloud to do this. But if I don't have a VMX and I want to connect multiple clouds, then if we come down here to non-Meraki VPN peers, we can actually set those VPN connections up here. Tell it what the private subnets are, all of that. And for your IPsec policies, you can see I'm using a default policy for Azure and AWS for AWS. I did that just to test them out. But if you click on this, these are all preset policies. These come out of the box. So you have AWS, Azure, Umbrella. You have all of these already set up. Now, you can see I don't have OCI in here just because the OCI VPN is not compatible with the Meraki VPN just yet. But it's super simple and easy to use. I wanted to show that to you and show that you can have more than one VPN connection through your virtual private network inside Azure, AWS, OCI. No matter what cloud it is, you just add more connections to it. But now that that playbook has run, we can come back over here and you can see that I've only got 4 nodes left and time's up. So I have one more question for you. And this one is, oh, we already did that. Sorry. Yeah, I showed that already live. So what do you think is a reasonable boot time for ISE from power on to login ready? So as soon as you turn it on, how long should it take to boot up? In minutes or seconds. And while you guys are finishing that up, I do want to let you know that yes, the GitHub is live. It's out there. Of course, it's ISE and multi-cloud webinar, just like my virtual environment. And this is the link that you can go to view all of that. Sorry that we went a little bit over time. Hopefully you found some real use out of it. And here's a bunch of other resources that you can use. Thank you.